All right, so this is an introduction to Convention of States Action. Convention of States Action is a nonpartisan grassroots organization, and we are trying to solve a certain number of problems. So today we're going to be talking about the problems that we have the ability to solve, the solution that we have, and how you can get involved. So what are the problems? The problems that we can solve in our nation today are the national debt and spending, which is outrageous. We can solve the problem of career politicians, and we can solve the problem of federal overreach, the fact that the federal government has its fingers in virtually every area of our lives. This chart here shows our national debt, and you can see that the red and the blue shows which party is in control of the presidency at any given time. If you look at the little dots on the bottom, it will show you who is in control of the House and the Senate, and then it will show you how we are up right now to about $34.2 trillion as of February. That's a whole lot of trillions. And if you look at this chart, you can see that back around the time I was born, we were only, I don't know, $2, $3 trillion. So most of this has happened in my lifetime. Beyond that, most of this has actually happened during the lifetime of my own children, which are just the oldest is entering high school. That's a whole lot of upward momentum. What's going on? And you might say, well, it's the such and such party, but you can see looking at this chart that it isn't specific to one party. Both the red and the blue kind of equally contributed to our national debt. This isn't a Republican issue. This isn't a Democrat issue. Our national debt and spending is a Washington, D.C. issue. That debt would be wonderful if that debt was on the heads of the people making the choice to get us into that debt, but unfortunately, that is not the reality. The people we elect that go to Washington, D.C. spend money on our behalf, which means when they get into debt, the people who will ultimately have to pay that debt is you and me. Right now, or I should say in 2023, if a child was born, they owned $78,000 of national debt the day they were born. You can see by this chart that they are projected that by the time that they are 18, that they will have $143,000 of national debt. If we continue as we are currently projected to continue, by the time they're 30 years old, they'll have $226,000 of national debt to their name. Now that's one person in a family. If you have a spouse, you can double that. If you have kids, you can triple that or quadruple that or however many you have. That's a whole lot of money. I don't know about you. I don't have that kind of money. So who's getting us into all of this debt? Well, we have a lot of people participating in Washington, D.C., but we also have some career politicians. A lot of politicians, they come and they go, but there are those that stick around. Some examples of this are the people you see on your screen. Mitch McConnell has been on for 39 years. That's older than I am. We have Dianne Feinstein. She did 22 years. Chuck Grassley has been in for 43 years and is intending to go again. Chuck Schumer, 43 years. That's a lot of years. If we go back to this chart and we go back 43 years, you can see where we were with national debt when all this started. Now, are these four people personally responsible for all the debt? No, absolutely not. But we have a certain culture in Washington, D.C. of spending, and there's certain people that have been in leadership and involved all the way through. How are we ending up with this? Is this just because of money? Well, no, it isn't just because of money. If you look at this chart, you can see that the re-election success rate, basically people who are elected to an office in Congress that then go and try to get re-elected, they have a hugely high re-election rate, 94.8% overall. This chart isn't talking about the last 5 years. It's talking about all the way back to 1789, basically from the beginning. There has always been a high re-election rate. And in the beginning, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have TV ads, and they didn't have people with huge mountains of money that wanted to, get certain people elected to pass a certain agenda, at least not in the way that we think of now. There were always special interests. There weren't then the way there are now. So what's changed? What's changed is not the re-election rate. What's changed is the average tenure in Congress. In the beginning, people didn't try to get reelected over and over and over and over again. You can see the average tenure way back in the beginning was around basically a term, maybe 2 terms. Now, the average tenure is up to, I'd say, 3 to 4. Why is that happening? Well, there's a lot of things we could look at, but ultimately this has become a career option for people. In the beginning, this was service. Now people do it as a thing that they do. I personally would prefer to have the people representing me in Washington, D.C. be people who have recently been functioning as a normal citizen right next door, not someone who's been in D.C. so long that they don't remember what it's like to live as a normal American citizen. All right. Let's move on to federal overreach. We've talked about career politicians. We've talked about debt and spending. What about this federal overreach thing, right? The federal government's got its fingers in all the pies. How does that happen? Well, when we see federal overreach, we normally throw it at whatever the government's doing that we don't like. I'd prefer not to do that. I would prefer to go back to the Constitution and say, well, what should the federal government be doing? Because that really informs our conversation. According to the Constitution, the federal government is given authority to cover these particular areas. They are given authority to make treaties with foreign countries, to appoint ambassadors. They're in charge of national defense, maintaining the military, declaring war, punishing pirates. That's my favorite one, by the way. Establishing a court system beneath the Supreme Court, regulating our currency, establishing standard weights and measures, naturalization, that's kind of like citizenship issues, bankruptcy laws, establishing post offices, and interstate commerce. Now, this last one is really important. Interstate commerce is kind of the opening into our lives for the federal government, but that isn't what it was to begin with. Why is interstate commerce something that was put under the federal government? Interstate commerce was put under the federal government because when the 13 colonies became the 13 states, they didn't all like each other very much. And because of this, there were certain states that were putting tariffs on goods going from one state to another. And it was getting really close to actually being a bloody thing. It was getting violent potentially. And the federal government, or I should say not the federal government, but the founders, when they were writing up the Constitution, were like, this is absurd. We need to create a way to have things being sold from one state to another be an easier process. And so that's actually what interstate commerce means. It is the regulating of things so that they smooth the process of moving things from one state to another. And so that is why the federal government was given authority over interstate commerce, the moving of goods from one state to another, so we wouldn't have this situation with tariffs and potentially an internal war over something stupid like that. So we handed this authority to the federal government, and that's what it meant, and that makes sense. However, by the year 1942, things had changed quite a bit. One thing that had changed is that the federal government had decided that not only did they have the right to regulate how things move from one state to another, but also to regulate how much of those goods could be sold from one state to another, and how much goods one particular person could sell from one state to another, and so on and so forth. It had gotten kind of ridiculous already, but we upped the ante in 1942 because there was a farmer named Roscoe Filburn, and he was a wheat farmer in Ohio. And he decided that, you know what, he knew that there were these particular rules about how much you could sell across state lines, but he was going to grow extra wheat, and he wasn't going to sell it, he was going to eat it. And he was going to feed it to his animals, and his family was going to eat it, and that shouldn't be any issue legally because he wasn't selling it across state lines. Well, the federal government disagreed with him, and in 1942, the court ruled that because he was not participating in interstate commerce, selling things across state lines, he was affecting it by his lack of participation. And because of that, the federal government had the authority to tell him what he could do on his farm. Now, why is this important? This is important because by this logic, your toilet is affecting interstate commerce by its lack of participation. Your job is affecting interstate commerce, your schools, your churches. Every component inside your refrigerator is affecting interstate commerce by its lack of participation. And that is the reason why there is nothing in our lives that is not currently regulated by the federal government. None of that is listed in the Constitution. They used this court case to get into every area of our lives. Now you might say, what's the point with them doing this in amending the Constitution when they're not following it anyways, right? It sounds logical to me. Well, the answer to that is quite simple. They're not following the pamphlet you learn about in school, but that isn't the Constitution that our country currently is run under. This is it, this giant encyclopedia-looking thing, or I should say dictionary. It's huge, 3,000 pages. This is the annotated Constitution, and if you order it from the federal government, you will receive that pamphlet inside of it, along with every court case that ever changed the meanings of the words of the Constitution you learned in school. And according to our federal government, this is the law of the land. We don't want to amend the original Constitution. We want to amend this Constitution, because this is the one they follow. Now, Congress is not the only party that participates in federal overreach. We also have bureaucrats. In 2012, unelected bureaucrats wrote 193 laws costing at least $100 million each. With over 80,000 pages of regulations, the average American commits 3 felonies per day. Now, these laws written by bureaucrats are called regulations. In a court of law, they bear the weight of law the vast majority of the time. What does that look like? Well, this pile of papers you see on the left side of the screen, that's the laws that Congress in general will write and get signed into law by the president. The pile you see on the right, those are all the regulations. We have a problem. You can't vote bureaucrats out because you don't vote them in. So here's a whole lot of problems, right? We have huge debt and spending. We have bureaucratic overreach. We have congressional overreach. We have overreach in the court system. We have career politicians. It's like all over the place, right? But all of these things are actually not the real problem. These are all the symptoms of the problem. How did we get to this place? And the answer to that question, the real problem, is you and me. We in our nation have this misconception that the federal government dictates to the state government, and the state government dictates to we the people. And that's where the authority lies. Federal government is the daddy, then you got the state government, and then you got we the people, the little peons on the bottom. That's the way we think about it. But that isn't the reality. If you open up your Constitution, what are the first words in there? It's we the people. We the people of the United States of America. We the people of the United States of America are the ones that give authority to the state legislatures. The state legislatures, in turn, gave authority to the federal government. If you open up that Constitution and you read it, you will find that the Constitution itself says that it had to be ratified by the state legislatures. The state legislatures, imbued with power by the people, gave authority to the federal government. So what does that mean? It means that this chart is upside down. The federal government gets authority from the 50 state legislatures of the United States of America, who in turn get authority from we the people. So if there's a problem in our country, if we have federal overreach, if we have career politicians, if we have ridiculous debt and spending, who should be solving this problem? Is it the federal government? No. They're at the bottom of this pyramid. They are the child. We are the adults. I have 6 children. If I look at my children and I say, I want you to go clean your room every single day, and in 4 years, I'm going to come and I'm going to check and see if you did it. Do you think they're going to clean their room every single day? I've asked that question a bunch of times. I have yet to have someone tell me yes. I don't think they will. I don't even have to try it. But close to the end of the 4-year mark, I think they would start coming up close to me and saying things along the lines of, I think I'm going to start cleaning my room every day. It sounds like an election year, right? Mom and dad are going to check. Better get your act together. Make them think you're going to do what you're supposed to be doing. If you want your kid's room to be clean on a regular basis, you have to go check that room on a regular basis. And if it's not being done, you have to talk to them about it. Are we talking to our legislators? Is it fair for us to look at them and say, how come you're screwing up all the time when we only talk to them through a vote every 4 years? Now, maybe they should still be doing the right thing. Don't get me wrong. They should still be doing the right thing. But we are the parent. And if your kid misbehaves in a store, who's in trouble? The kid or the parent? The parent. Because the parent is the one who is supposed to control the kid. We are supposed to be in charge of our government. We have done a horrible job. You have authority as a citizen in the United States of America. I have authority. We need to fix this problem.